Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our fourth webinar of our 2026 webinar series. My name is Sienna Faust. I'm an Ocean and Coastal Law Fellow at the National Sea Grant Law Center. In today's presentation, Dr. Amy Grogan, Director of the HAB Control website for the U.S. Harmful Algal Bloom Control Technology Incubator at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, and I will discuss how to use the new U.S. HAB Control website to streamline permitting harmful algal bloom control technologies. Before we begin, just a few quick housekeeping notes. We have everyone on mute right now to cut down on background noise. This webinar is being recorded and we will post it to our website as soon as we can after the webinar. It usually takes a couple of days to get the transcripts and captions finalized, but we'll share it over email and then post it on our website. If you have technical issues during the webinar, you can private chat Lauren Freeman, National Sea Grant Law Center's project coordinator and webinar host. Finally, if you have questions during our presentation, you can put them in the chat. We'll also have time for a Q&A at the end of the webinar to respond to questions. For anyone unfamiliar with our office, the National Sea Grant Law Center was founded in 2002. We are housed at the University of Mississippi School of Law. Our mission is to conduct legal research, education, and outreach for the wider Sea Grant network of 34 Sea Grant programs and their stakeholders. If you are interested in learning about our work, I encourage you to visit our website and follow us on social media. With that, I will now unshare my screen and then I'll pass it back to Amy Grogan to introduce herself and demonstrate some of HAB Control website's key features and practical tools.
Okay. All right. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
I think my face is not up there anymore.
I think your camera's off. If you
Oh,
want to turn that back on.
no, that's it. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, there we go. Okay,
Perfect.
hi everyone. I'm Dr. Amy Grogan. As Sienna said, I am with the US HAB Control, um, excuse me, US HAB Control Technologies Incubator, and I'm going to be talking about our new website, the Harmful Algal Bloom Control Technologies and Regulatory Logistics. So it's a mouthful, but you can remember it's HAB Control. And this is a web tool for HAB Control product developers, researchers, and managers. A little bit of background about Harmful Algal Bloom Control Technologies Incubator, or HAB CTI. The mission of HAB CTI is to accelerate the assessment and development of technologies that are feasible, environmentally acceptable, scalable, and cost-effective. And that comes into three large categories. The first is funding external research on HAB control product development. The second is synthesizing this website that highlights regulatory and permitting procedures as well as other information. And then providing equipment and instrumentation for researchers who are working on product development of harmful algal bloom, technologies. So this is a partnership between NOAA, the University of Maryland's Center for Environmental Sciences, specifically IMET, the Institute of Marine and Environmental Technology, as well as the Moat Marine Lab. We know that harmful algal blooms are a major issue in the US, and they pose a lot of different issues, including the closure of fisheries and recreational areas, public health issues from toxins, and environmental degradation from both toxins and dissolved oxygen limitations. However, oftentimes we don't treat harmful algal blooms. So what's the better way to go about it? To treat or not to treat? And the problem with potential treatment is that it's not a simple fix. Harmful algal blooms are complex. The organisms that create them are constantly adapting and changing, and the algal blooms themselves can move from place to place. They are in borderless environments, i.e., in brackish and marine waters like estuaries and coastal environments. there is no confinement, so they're moving all over the place. Treatments have to be cost effective in order to be used, which can be very challenging. And then the target of treatments can vary depending on the needs, whether that be mitigating the algal cells, the toxins that are created, or both. So because of this and some other factors, a lot of times what happens is that we employ the waited out strategy until the algal bloom takes its natural course and ends. But there are some promising solutions and technologies that are on the horizon, including physical treatments, some previously approved technologies, specifically for freshwater environments that are now being approved for marine environments, benign compounds, which are also referred to as minimum risk compounds like curcumin. You've heard that turmeric causes 99% of problems. Well, it also can help with harmful algal blooms. Clay flocculation, which has been successful in China, and bioengineering, like taking phages that attack harmful algal species and introducing them to the environment in a controlled setting. So we have these promising solutions, and physical treatment and previously approved products are both currently approved for use and are in use. But one of the biggest roadblocks is regulation. Well-meaning regulation has often stifled innovation in this field because algicides are considered pesticides through the federal government, and therefore they must go through the same robust approval procedures as insecticides, rodenticides, and fungicides. And it's a long and winding road to get these technologies approved. There's federal registration, differing state policies, as well as various other regulatory acts that govern the use of these HAB control products. With that in mind, the website has three primary objectives. The first is to highlight the federal procedure for registering new HAB control products. The second is to spotlight federal acts and additional regulations governing the use of algicides, and then looking at the state-specific regulatory landscape of algicides and their registration in different states. I'm going to play a video that has been pre-recorded so that we don't have any technical issues. This is spotlighting the website itself. At the top of the homepage, you'll see a navigation bar as well as a search function. There are three sections of quick access tools on the site, including resource navigation, acts and regulatory agencies, and control strategies. Starting with control strategies, we can see that there are several categories of algal controls. We can look at each of these categories and learn more about the various subcategories. The EPA designates pesticides into 4 general categories, including biochemical, conventional, antimicrobial, and minimum risk. If we want to learn more, other than the definition that's provided about any of these chemicals,
Amy, I think you need to unmute because the audio was just muted for you. Thanks.
as well as additional information, considerations such as the Endangered Species Act here, and questions and who to contact at the various agencies. Once you've determined which kind of category your product falls under, you can go back up to the navigation resources and choose research requirements. This will give you the research requirements for federal registration of your product. This provides you with a decision tree asking for the type of ingredient, type of chemical, registration type, and whether or not the chemical is food use. Let's choose end use product which means that the product is complete and ready for deployment. We'll stick with conventional. For the registration type, we'll do experimental use. And then for food use, algicides are not traditionally used for food. However, algicides used in aquatic environments may leave residues on organisms harvested for food, including finfish, shellfish, and other organisms. Therefore, if an algicide is used in such environments, it means that it does fall under the food use designation. So we'll click yes for that. After you make your decisions, you will be given this table that provides you the EPA guideline name, as well as the guideline test number and the requirement status of each of those tests, which could be R for required, CR for additional and conditionally required, or NR for not required. Going back to the home page, we can learn more about the other ways in which pesticides are regulated by various permitting laws and acts. The blue boxes signify primary permitting laws, and those should be what you start with first when registering a pesticide. We'll choose the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act to start, also known as FIFRA. On one of these pages, you will get a general overview with a background, the implementing agency, regulatory applications, permits applicable to the algicide use, and then contacts at the agency for any pertinent questions. On these pages, there are also external and internal links. So clicking the title of any of these ACT pages will take you to the agency responsible or governing that act. And some of the internal links available here in the permit applicable to algicide use, we can choose pesticide product registration application, which will give us more information about the registration steps required, additional links to both internal and external pages. For example, here, if we want to learn more about product labeling, we can go to this page, which gives us an overview on product labeling. Similarly, with the title of this page, it will bring us to the EPA's site on labeling. So any information that's not on that page, you can learn more about here. And if we return, another aspect of the FIFRA page here, another internal link, is the US MAPS page. So once we've determined what the federal requirements are, and we want to determine what the state requirement is for pesticide registration and use, we can click on this US regulatory map page. Here we'll be provided with a map of the US where we can click on any of the states. We're also given two options for a link, A and B. Link A is going to be the pesticide registration process, and link B is going to be the HAB issues and management in the state or region. So we'll choose link A for now. Get back to Massachusetts, there we go. On any of these state pages, we'll be given the EPA region that the state falls into, the Army Corps division and potentially district that the state falls into, as well as a couple of things that will be on every state, including the overview of the process, special considerations, registration and renewal information, experimental use permit information, applicator licensing, and NPDES permitting. There will be different aspects to each state page that are unique to the state that you find yourself in. So for example, Massachusetts is a commonwealth, meaning that every town or city has a conservation committee which reviews the use of pesticides in that area. If we want to learn more about the conservation committees, we can click here to this external link, find our city or town, and learn about the conservation for that area. Moving back to the home page, we can look at some additional field study information. Here we have experimental use permitting. Similar to other pages, we have an overview, and here we also have some of the required forms for experimental use permit. When forms are applicable, they will be on the site pages. So here we could choose this EPA form, and it will bring us directly to the form. On the top of each of these section pages, you have a map of where you've been. So you can go back to where you previously were. And we'll bring that back to the home page. And the last thing that I'll highlight is the glossary. There are a lot of nuanced terms in the EPA's vernacular. So if you're looking through some of the literature and you need to determine what a certain term means, you can visit the glossary, choose alphabetically or by the name of the term. If we go to B and take a look at biopesticide, each of the terms will have links to relevant information, if applicable. So we'll have a definition here, and then a link that takes us to the biopesticide registration page on the EPA, which gives more detailed information about biopesticides. This site is a work in progress, as you can see, and we will rely on the users to help us continue to develop this site. At the top of the homepage, you'll see a nav. Trying to get to the next page. There it is. So although this presentation of the website was based primarily on regulations, that's the first step that we're looking to complete on this website. However, it is going to be a very robust product that continues to develop and grow over time, because HAB control is a multi-stakeholder task to undertake. And you can see here the wonderful web of HAB control and all of the various stakeholders and tasks that are involved. So as this website develops, we want to highlight some of the management that is going on currently of harmful algal blooms in different areas, how it impacts the public and what is the public opinion on treating algal blooms, the industry connection of products that are currently being created or are marketable, how that applies to policymakers and policy enforcement, and then also the scientific research that is currently taking place and is emerging to develop new HAB controls. As I mentioned in the video, we are really relying on our users to give us more guidance on what you want. So again, this is a multi-stakeholder platform for everyone to learn more and connect when it comes to HAB control strategies and technologies. If you follow this QR code, it will give you a short survey with questions about how this website could be improved, what you think, and then what kind of questions you have. We would love it if you took the time to complete this. And this website will be officially launched soon. And I want to thank Taylor Armstrong, Sienna Faust, and the HAB CTI website team, especially the website team. Our website has been developed by students at the University of Maryland, and they have done an exceptional job, as you can see.
Thanks, Amy. That was a great overview and demonstration. I'm going to go ahead and reshare my screen.
I just saw a comment in the chat asking to go back to the QR code.
Oh,
just
sure.
had pulled up. Sorry, y'all.
That's quite all right. Let me see here. Share again. There we go. It's big.
We could also put it up at the end as
Yeah.
well.
Well, looks like we're good to go. We got a thumbs up. Thanks,
Okay,
y'all.
great.
All right, great.
Okay, as I mentioned, I'm Sienna Faust, an Ocean and Coastal Law Fellow at the National Sea Grant Law Center, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the permitting challenges of HAB control technologies from the legal perspective and from the case studies that we've worked on, and then describe some of the corresponding HAB control website solutions and tools for researchers. I work with Amy on the website and have been working with the U.S. Harmful Algal Bloom Control Technologies Incubator, US HAB CTI, for over a year and a half. I've been mostly focused on mapping out the permitting process for different novel HAB control technologies, particularly on the marine side where there wasn't a clearly established process. I'm going to start with talking about 3 regulatory challenges with the HAB control technologies permitting process and how the HAB control website helps researchers overcome them. The first challenge I will discuss is, as Amy mentioned, not having a roadmap or high-level instructions of which regulatory agencies you must speak to and which permits and approvals you must obtain before testing a harmful algal bloom control product in public waters, especially in large and connected bodies of water like marine environments. Then I will highlight how the HAB control website identifies primary statutes, agencies, and permits that are important for this work. The second challenge I will describe is also one of the reasons it's so difficult to present a straightforward roadmap, is that there are different permitting requirements based on different types of technologies and where you plan to test or deploy. The HAB control website, as we saw in Amy's video demonstrating the website, it has these interactive tools to identify guidance specific to a certain technology as well as location. The third challenge with HAB control technologies permitting is being able to distill complicated and expansive statutory and data requirements. We've reviewed the requirements and have pulled the most relevant information for HAB control technologies and summarized it in plain language for the website. After discussing these challenges, I will go over a few case studies that illustrate the complexity of this process and how the website can be used as a resource for navigating these challenges. The first major regulatory challenge is not having a roadmap for permitting HAB control technologies. It can be very difficult not to know what statutes, permits, and approvals might be involved for a specific permitting pathway. There are multiple statutes governing activities in public water resources. There are statutes to protect health and safety for drinking water resources, swimming, and recreational and commercial fishing, such as the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act, or FIFRA, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, or FFDCA, and the Marine Protection, Research, and Sanctuaries Act, or MPRSA. Some statutes or sections of statutes or other sections of statutes protect navigation and commerce, such as the Rivers and Harbors Act, and other statutes protect important ecosystems and protected species, like the Clean Water Act and Endangered Species Act. The problem with the onus being on the researchers to take initiative and figure out which agencies they need to reach out to is that this greatly extends the permitting timeline and causes miscommunication when a researcher doesn't know what they should be asking for. Agencies can have a lot of expertise in one area, but may also be siloed and unable to provide direction on other permits that they are not in charge of. To remove some of the mystery from this process, the HAB control website clearly identifies on the homepage the primary statutes that tend to be involved with permitting HAB control products, along with other statutes researchers should be aware of for compliance. The website also clearly states what agency administers each statute or its pertinent section of a statute. When you click on one of the primary statutes and read the description and think this probably applies to your work, the webpage will also link other related pages on the website. For example, FFDCA tolerance requirements and PREA application guidelines are integrated into the product reviews for experimental use permits or applications for product registration under FIFRA, which is clearly stated on our FIFRA webpage, and we'll link to these other relevant web pages as well for easy navigation. Another example is that if you might need a research permit under the MPRSA, the Clean Water Act Section 401 water quality certification can be integrated into that permitting process. And the MPRSA page and Clean Water Act pages both indicate this. The second HAB control permitting challenge that I will discuss is that there are different requirements based on different type of technologies in different places. For example, different types of algicides have different review processes based on whether they're a conventional pesticide or biopesticide, or if their ingredients make them a minimum risk product, or if they already have established tolerances or exemptions for their ingredients. A device doesn't have an algicidal substance component, so it would also have a different permitting requirements. Location for testing or use also impacts which statutes are applicable, which permits are needed, and which agencies to contact. For example, when you're testing in, or whether you're testing in internal waters or ocean waters or within the jurisdiction of a certain state. Different states have unique environmental protection regulations, such as Florida's Environmental Resource Permit. The HAB Control website has interactive tools to get more specific information about what is applicable to your circumstances. For example, there's a decision tree where you can click buttons to figure out if a FIFRA experimental use permit might be needed. We're working on the interactive map of the US that we saw in Amy's presentation, where you can select different states to learn about state-specific information, which is really helpful. We've collected data on state-specific pesticide registration requirements for minimum risk products and devices, identified relevant state agencies for the pesticide registration and environmental permitting, and relevant general permits for discharging a product in internal waters in a state's jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act. The third challenge with HAB permitting is that the HAB control website seeks to address is having to distill expansive statutory and data requirements to find what applies to your product. Depending on the type of product, different parts of different statutes might apply, such as the Clean Water Act Section 401 for water quality certification of federally permitted discharges in state waters, Section 402 of the Clean Water Act for permitting point source discharges, and Section 404 of the Clean Water Act for permitting discharge of dredged or fill material. FIFRA also has a multitude of tables of product chemistry data requirements for pesticide registration and experimental use permits under FIFRA. The HAB control website summarizes relevant parts of these statutes in plain language for permitting HAB control technology. As Amy showed in her website demonstration video, she pulled out from those complicated and expansive tables of data requirements, specifically what's required for aquatic algicide control. Notably, the permitting process for products regulated under FIFRA is different based on how a product is categorized, such as a chemical or biological pesticide or a device. And the website has this great graphic on the homepage breaking down these different categories. The website also describes how EPA's test guidelines must be complied with to have EPA accept your data, such as having good laboratory practices, as well as which specific tests you need to complete for data requirements. To illustrate how the permitting process is complicated and can look different for different products, I'm going to discuss a few case studies on different HAB control technologies. One with modified clay, one a biochemical algicide, and one with a floating device. The first two we've also published case studies on that I've linked on these slides. Our first case study focused on researchers testing modified clay that would flocculate or combine with other particles in the water, including red tide cells, and then sink to the bottom of the water body. This is a pesticide subject to regulation under FIFRA to field test a pesticide in a public water body where a fish could swim through and be caught and eaten. All of the pesticide's ingredients require tolerances or tolerance exemptions under the FFDCA. Tolerances are maximum residue levels of a pesticide that can be present in food or feed. Because the process for petitioning for new tolerances or exemptions is arduous, the team went with ingredients that already had existing tolerances or exemptions. Then, to test in public waters, Pesticide residue is considered a pollutant under the Clean Water Act, requiring a permit to discharge. So the US EPA authorized Florida's Department of the Environment to issue permits under the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES program, to discharge in internal waters or in the waters of the United States and the state's jurisdiction. But focusing on the federal level, they didn't need a Marine Protection Resources and Sanctuaries Act permit because they weren't testing in ocean waters yet. And the US Army Corps of Engineers had confirmed that they didn't need a Rivers and Harbors Act permit because the tiny test amount of clay they would use wouldn't affect the course or condition of the water body, wouldn't constitute discharging dredged or fill material under Clean Water Act Section 404, and wouldn't constitute work regulated under the Rivers and Harbors Act. The Army Corps also suggested consulting with the team's local US Fish and Wildlife Service to ensure that their activities would comply with the Endangered Species Act. But because the project was being funded by NOAA staff stepped in to check for compliance with federal statutes, which included consultations with the appropriate agencies for the Endangered Species Act. At the state level, besides the NPDES permit, the researchers were exempted from having to obtain Florida's environmental resource permit and state experimental use permit because of the small scale of their planned field test. We wrote another case study on the permitting experience to test an algicide, which is not as far along in the permitting process as the modified clay, but similar to the modified clay, it is also regulated as a pesticide under FIFRA. The researchers on this team also wanted to test in public waters where fish could be caught and consumed, but instead of using already established tolerances or ingredients with already established tolerances or exemptions under the FFDCA, they decided to work with EPA to possibly obtain new tolerances or exemptions. An alternative to tolerances is supplying enough data to support a non-food determination where the ingredients are not likely to result in residues in or on food. However, either of these routes includes a significant amount of data requirements. After obtaining the tolerance or exemption or non-food determination, permitting this algicide is likely to proceed in a very similar way to the modified clay. At the federal level, because the researchers work for NOAA, other NOAA staff completed the Endangered Species Act consultations on their behalf to ensure compliance. The US Army Corps of Engineers confirmed that no Clean Water Act Section 404 or Rivers and Harbors Act permit is required for the algicide's planned field testing. And if the researchers want to test in ocean waters, they may need to get a research permit under the Marine Protection Research and Sanctuaries Act from EPA. At the state level, for a small scale field test, they are likely to again follow the similar path as the modified clay and working with the state agencies to comply with state environmental protection statutes and regulations. Now I'm going to talk about a device. This floating device uses physical or mechanical means to control harmful algal bloom, and would have a different permitting experience than the modified clay or the biochemical algicide. A device is defined under FIFRA as any instrument or contrivance intended to trap, destroy, repel, or mitigate a pest through physical or mechanical means. Devices don't need to be registered or permitted for testing under FIFRA, although they are subject to labeling requirements. A device does not contain a pesticidal substance that might expose food or feed to residues, so it does not need a tolerance or exemption for its ingredients under the FFDCA. Without discharging any substance, they generally don't need to be permitted under the Clean Water Act or MPRSA either. However, under Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act, placing a structure in, over, or affecting navigable federal waters requires authorization from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This includes semi-permanent obstructions and small structures like floating docks. If in public waters and anchoring a device in place or attaching it to a dock, even if the device is not a major obstruction, it may still need a permit from the Army Corps. The Army Corps will evaluate potential impacts of the device, like how it may affect the condition of the water or if it might obstruct navigation. They will also review the project to ensure compliance with the Endangered Species Act. They can see if the device qualifies for a nationwide or general permit, or if it doesn't qualify for either of those, but has very minor impacts so that developing an individual permit is not required, then it may be permitted with a letter of permission. In summary, with the new HAB control website, we hope to address challenges with permitting HAB control technologies, such as not having a roadmap, different requirements for different technologies in different places, and expansive statutory and data requirements. The new HAB control website identifies primary statutes, agencies, and permits that are important for this work, interactive tools to identify guidance specific to your technology and location, and highlights the most relevant statutory and data requirements for HAB control technologies, summarizing it in plain language for the website. The website is scheduled to go live in October. It is still in development, but we are continuing to add more content and features every week. My email is on this slide if you have questions, sjfaust@olmus.edu. And now we have some time for Q&A if anyone has any questions. We have one question in the chat regarding data requirements. Are lab studies sufficient or are mesocosm studies needed? I think mesocosms, our researchers that we've been working with have been using the mesocosm studies as well. Amy, do you know if that does require?
Yeah, the very popular answer is it depends. So it needs to be demonstrated that in a field type setting, your product is not going to impact non-target organisms. So mesocosms have been used for that, and several of the tests that are required are based on the impact to fish, invertebrates, different things that in the controlled environment with a mesocosm you can do. Usually you need to do that and demonstrate some of that data before you can get an experimental use permit. So it's not a hard and fast rule that you have to do mesocosms, but usually yes, in order to have the data needed in order to get an experimental use permit to use your product in the field.
Thank you for that response. I know it's a lot depending on the type of technology and the situation. We have another question. Floating devices are ultrasound generators. The product in mind that I was thinking about for this floating device was electromagnetic fluid device. I like adding oxygen to the water to restore the ecosystem where a HAB might be threatening it. Another question. So assuming a product or technology gets permitted for use, who decides when and where to deploy it in real time? Using red tide in Florida as an example, will private citizens have the ability to use products in waters of the state whenever they want? I would say that's more once like getting to the commercialization of a product when it has already been registered by FIFRA, if that's required, or has a label that will guide the use of the product. And also some states do require pesticide applicator licenses in order to apply these products. So again, it kind of depends, but yeah, it's if the product has been sold on the commercial level and is for private citizens to use it, if it's available for them, then they would have to follow the label.
Yeah, to add a little bit to that, something that EPA stresses is that the label is the law. So you'll see that there are tons of herbicides, insecticides, a wall of chemicals if you go to, a hardware store or Home Depot or Lowe's that are seemingly unregulated, but that's how the regulation works is the label is the law. So if you are not following them in accordance with the label, you are technically breaking the law. So yeah, as Sienna said, if something gets approved and it is not approved in such a way that requires license for application, then yes, any person could use that product in their personal area.
Um, I also see that you mentioned that resources from users can help further the development of the website. Can you explain that more? I think that's about kind of the forum that you shared, Amy.
Yeah, so one of the things that we'd like to have users help us propagate is the FAQ section. So if you are somebody who is working on product development or you're a manager and you're looking for potential products to use, you can fill out that form and add an FAQ or other feedback about what you would like to see this website develop into. So in the interest of time, I didn't include one of the slides that I had. However, our focus has initially been the regulatory process, but as we move forward, we're going to focus more on that stakeholder network, including HAB management and connecting researchers with industry and the commercialization process. So I like to call it science to sales, as well as connecting researchers and managers to the end users or the community who is actually impacted by these algal blooms. And there needs to be public buy-in in order for a technology that might be promising to be used in the environment. If people are opposed to it, then it doesn't matter how good it works. It's not going to be able to be deployed.
I see Carlos asked, I think again about the device example I used. Continuous inversion laminar flow systems are not included. I was just using for this presentation an example of a device using physical or mechanical means to control harmful algal blooms, just to show the distinction of a product that doesn't necessarily need to be permitted or registered under FIFRA and what other statutes, like the Rivers and Harbors Act, might be applicable to it in contrast with other products that are pesticides under FIFRA and do require registration. So there are other devices, other types of devices. I was just kind of broadly generalizing with that one.
I'm going to skip one of the questions and answer this one very quickly.
Sure.
It's, on the regulations directory map, the labels link A and link B are not intuitive. Those are just placeholders for now. As I mentioned, the website is a work in progress. So those will say HAB registration and permitting, and then the other one will say HAB issues and management. So it'll be for each of those options for the state. And then this one is the continuum of technology development and testing. Where should the researcher start the permitting application before you even start the research? It's a very, very that's the whole purpose of of what we're doing is that it's a very long and arduous process. And we've had folks who are working on these technologies and they're really promising and they're great, but then they get to this stopping point. It would be especially pertinent for you to read the first study that Sienna mentioned, the clay case study, because that's a real poster child for having a great idea and then all of a sudden being bombarded with like, actually, you need to do this and you need to do that and you need to do this. And we didn't know that you needed to do this, but you need to talk to this person. So the regulatory process is really crazy and something that you can do that is not, I don't think there's a page yet on the website, but something that you can do at the EPA level is a pre-application meeting. And even if you don't have any data and you just have kind of the semblance of a plan, you can meet with them and talk about what kinds of requirements you would need to complete and, develop your idea based on that, because some of the things are just too costly and time consuming to really consider. And it's very unfortunate, but it's kind of the fact of the matter.
Yeah, I would also add to that in the second case study that I put up about the algicide, sometimes we've had scientists who have completed rigorous data collection and testing on a product and then realized that they needed other tests um, to do. And so they had to go back to complete other tests or work with EPA to try to figure out what made sense in that situation. So knowing ahead of time what's going to apply to you, that pre-application meeting, knowing what data you're going to need to collect, that's all really important and can really impact the time frame of how long this process can take.
I see one that's state oversight. If there needs to be state oversight or permission in addition to federal permitting, will the site provide information on whom to contact at the state levels? Yes. So there will be everybody that you would need to get in touch with at the state levels will be highlighted on those state pages. I know I kind of scrolled through it quickly, but if you have the time to really look through that information, all of that would be there. The level and what state status and regs need to be met. And some of the states are more complicated than others. Massachusetts, I don't recommend trying to use product. They have a lot of nuances going on, particularly that conservation committee in each town. So it needs to be approved by the state, and then it needs to be approved by individual towns and cities.
We have one comment from Rhonda Watkins mentioning that this might be a good presentation for the Florida HAB Task Force, complimenting this is a great website in the making and a great place to send people that have the magic fix for all HABs and want to understand what it will take to get a product approved. Thank you, Rhonda. So that might be something to consider, Amy.
Yeah, that would be great. We just presented at the Moat Red Tide Initiative conference in June.
In Sarasota.
Yeah, but that would be great. I'm happy to present this to as many people who want to see it and hear about it.
We also have a comment from Andrew dialing in from the UK. Really interesting to see the challenges we face, not only with HABs themselves, but also the regulations. This website will be focused on US law and US scenarios. Do we envision at any point in the future this potentially expanding to other regions of the world?
I think that maybe like in a very long term, there's so much in the US that it's going to take us a long time to really make a complete product. However, I think that some of the case studies are kind of like lessons learned from other countries. For example, the clay product is used in China, China or Korea, in Asia very successfully. So okay, both China and Korea. Um, so learning from other places and trying to implement the structure that they have for regulations or, commercializing products and stuff, I think that that's a great way for us to kind of grow what we have. And something we've also discussed is trying to work with the EPA to establish specific guidelines for algicides, specifically in the marine environment. So again, we didn't have this could have been I could have talked to you for 90 minutes, but I only had 15. So the process for algicide approval for freshwater environments is much more straightforward. However, the marine environments and open water is a lot more complicated. And we are hoping to work with the EPA to establish a clear guideline for that process because it's so different from your traditional rodenticides and insecticides and fungicides.
Um, Mario notes that some states like Ohio have their own program designed to evaluate potential HAB treatment technologies. They may benefit from awareness of this website as they may not be thinking ahead about the regulatory and permitting landscape when technologies become promising.
If
Okay.
you can drop the a link in the chat, Mario, that would be great, and I will happily reach out to them.
That would be good. International Conference on Harmful Algae is in Scotland next year. Would be a great forum to present this to a wide-ranging international audience.
Yeah, I would love to attend. I think that that's going to be up to the PI of this project. It's not me,
Yeah,
but
but definitely would be cool.
yeah, I hope to be able to attend that. I think it would also be a great way to spotlight what we're doing and the website as well as get feedback from people in other parts of the world.
Mhm.
Thank you, Mario.
And Felix notes we need to connect with the Great Lakes HAB Collaborative. Yes, let's get connected with everyone so they know what we're doing.
Yeah, and that's something that the two states that are currently completed are Massachusetts and New Mexico, and those kind of sound like odd and random, but it was based on the NIPD's permitting, the National Pollution
Discharge elimination system.
Discharge elimination system. Yes, I can never remember. Um, so those permits come through the EPA, whereas most of those permits come from the state level. So I started there because they were EPA based. However, I've been talking to a lot of different states, and many states also have HAB working groups that they meet with regularly. So I'm trying to identify those and get on board with them and meet more of the stakeholders. So any people or groups suggestions, please drop them in the chat or send me an email. I'm going to put my email in the chat again, and I'm happy to hear about all of this.
Amy Mario also put the link to the Ohio
Yes, I did see
Okay,
that.
great.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Oh yeah, the Great Lakes Commission, the HABs Collaborative. I've watched a lot of their webinars.
I'm just gonna give it another minute, see if anything. It would be interesting to consider situations where HABs develop in inland or freshwaters, then flow
Ooh.
out to estuarine or coastal waters. What regs apply where?
That is a really interesting question, and I think it would almost be like when you cross state lines, the rules for the highway change or something. That's a bad analogy, but maybe. Because I think that at the start, it would be like Lake Okeechobee is a really good example of that, but it's not a natural flow out of the lake. But we know that, they let the cyanobacteria dense green water out to the coast, and then it mixes with brackish water. And cyanobacteria are so hardy that a lot of times they do not perish in the brackish water and continue to create toxins. So yes, I'm actually in the Alaska Harmful Algal Bloom Network. I still haven't come to a meeting, but sorry, I saw that in the chat and got distracted. Um, but yeah, I think that that would be a very interesting situation of like where the line is drawn. And I think that a lot of the issues here, the regulations are very strict and complicated, but it's also, no pun intended, uncharted waters because this is not been done to date. And a lot of the problem is the regulation and the amount of time and money that goes into creating these products that has, again, stifled innovation because it's just not feasible.
See if there's anyone else that has any questions. Um, We'll start wrapping up and thank everyone for joining us for our webinar today. I hope you all enjoyed it. A big thanks to Amy Grogan for presenting today. Stay tuned for announcements about our webinar series as we continue throughout the year at the National Sea Grant Law Center. We also invite everybody to join us for the Law Center's next webinar on September 16th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, focused on the U.S. Supreme Court 2025 term in review and implications for sea grant work. The registration link, I'll just pop that right in the chat. in case anybody wants to register for that. So we will be posting the recording of this webinar on our website as soon as it's available. And you can also stay tuned for future announcements from the Law Center by following us on social media. Thanks, everyone. Have a great
I also see
Oh, yeah.
Cedar Rapids. We will be there. So
We will be there.
I'm going to be handing out flyers with a QR code for this website, like somebody on the streets of New York trying to get you to take a bus tour in Times Square. So, yes, I'll find you and tell you about the website. But yeah, we'll be there. So keep an eye out for us. We have a session specifically about the technologies. Well, yeah, I think, yeah, thank you. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you, Amy.